is presenting on Problematizing Digital Archaeology, a call for conversation. And I'm sure it will spark some interesting discussion afterwards. So thank you all.
Thanks. Well, so this is the first time I'm also doing the hybrid, to be honest with you. It will be also interesting for me to do the camera and do the audience at the same time. And also I have to say, I think I had my job interview here, right? I mean, that's, so after, I don't know how many months or something, this is the first time I'm having this audience other than the students. So it's also interesting for me. I have to say I'm a bit rusty when it comes to these things, but let's see how that goes. And one other thing is, so this is not going to be a presentation with lots of numbers. It's not modeling, it's not JS, it is not satellite remote sensing, etc. It is more of hey, can we have a conversation about the issues that we might be having in the future, especially since we are talking about more and more digital technologies. This is the whole aim, basically. And when it comes to that, when you listen to it, please just maybe if you can take a couple of take-home messages from this conversation, and when you attend, please attend the other DAC meetings also, then maybe you can just somehow relate what we are discussing today to the upcoming presentations, because I think they are intrinsically somehow related to each other. And finally, some of you know me already from the classes or from other collegial environments. I have this tendency to make the things political in general, and you are going to also have this thing today. I have to admit, sorry about that. There are some already down faces there. So this is going to be probably a little bit anti-corporate, anti-militarist thing happening, but my intention was definitely not that. So I will just try to make things a little bit more visible to you, and that act of making it visible is already a political act, I have to say. And I think some people will be also saying okay, maybe why did we hire this person? We thought this was an archaeologist rather than a politician or something. But I'm not a politician, just things tend to go that way anyway. So that's the whole thing anyway. So that's the housekeeping a little bit. And if you have any questions, that will be, as was said, it will be a Q&A session. I will try to go as smooth and as fast as possible, so we have a little bit more time. So this is only just to drop you some ideas, very half-baked ideas, and to see if we can do something with it. And of course, thanks to the organizers, and it will be great to make this thing a bit like a recurrent event, which is obviously the case anyways, right? So okay, I'm new here, guys, sorry. Okay, I'm still learning my way around. This is the limit for the camera, right?
Yes.
Okay. So today there are a couple of things that we are going to be talking about, and I have to say those top three, this digital metaphors, digital myths and transformations, is going to be also part of this book chapter that we are writing with my co-author, with Piraya, and that will be also part of the APL volume that we are also trying to make, but the rest is also additions to today's talk. And these things are just there for not specific reasons. These are all, let's say, the terms that we can discuss in different domains. And when you want to connect these issues, these understandings together, you can connect them in many different ways. So when I first started writing or just preparing this presentation, I realized, okay, metaphors and myths are related to each other and they feed into the transformation, etc. But at the same time, when I just look back after I finished the presentation, I realized, okay, you can connect all these issues, this digital archaeology issues, in different ways too. So please do not take it as a face value. As long as you kind of focus on what these are individually, then you can just look back and see if you can connect it in different ways. And that's the main idea of it anyways, of this presentation. And usually in most of the cases, I'm going to handle all these terms in 3 slides. So 2 slides for the introduction, and the last slide is for how archaeology is related to these issues. Here's another way of connecting it. Again, don't pay so much attention to it. It's just a matter of saying, hey, this is another way to approach to digital archaeology in different ways, and how we can restructure digital archaeology so that it is a little bit more beneficial and it's more ethical, less exploitative, etc., etc. And again, so these are not the only components that we might go into this presentation that you can add, you can subtract. This is all modular. So this is also part of the digital, right? So you can basically do whatever you want to do. And for the sake of time, I had to just take out automation, I think, which is a very important component of the digital archaeology when it comes to making like things work for us, especially with this AI and big data and everything else. But for some like time concerns, basically, it is out. But please also know that this automation is a very important thing to keep in mind when we are doing our work. And all of this thing to say, of course, that is maybe some people will disagree. If you disagree, please, I would like to hear that. It is all just to say we need a social theory for the digital and of the digital. And it is obviously lacking, to my taste, to my understanding, it is lacking in archaeology. So I think we have to somehow start thinking about how we can theorize the digital archaeology as well. There are lots of very good scholars. They have been working for many, many years, but there's no cohesive critical understanding of digital archaeology in general. So this is only going to approach to that issue from a specific angle. So this is nothing comprehensive. It is just basically, as I said, half-baked ideas. Just take as much as you want and leave the rest if you don't like it. So let's start with the metaphors. So like, I mean, I'm not going to read the explanations of what a metaphor is. So we know basically it is a figurative speech. You're trying to map an understanding which is foreign to you by using some physical objects or something that you know already, and you're trying to understand what the unknown thing is. And one of the easiest or the earliest examples that one might give is this desktop, right? And this desktop is in fact a metaphor that we are using. So on your computer screen, these are all signals, electronics, bits, bytes, codes, etc. But there's nothing to do with the desktop. So the computer scientists use this desktop metaphor to say, okay, like it looks like a desktop, right? So we have the recycle bin, we have folders, we have files, etc., etc. So these are the metaphors are heavily used in digital domain. And one of the recent metaphors is called the cloud computing, right? So like just a very quick definition. So it's basically the idea is to distribute digital operations over a network of large data centers so we can scale up immediately what we can do. So that is another recent metaphor. So cloud is a metaphor for this thing here that is going to make our work better, faster, easier, more, like etc., etc. But when we look at the actual cloud itself, whatever that cloud is, like the cloud is an infrastructure, first of all. It is made of advanced computing machines, underground fiber optic cables, reliable electricity grids, cooling machinery, the water resources, the reliable labor force, educated labor force. So the cloud is like an amorphous concept, which is kind of imposed to us by the computer scientists. It is out there somewhere. It is all in the sky. Everything's connected together. Don't worry about it. Like that's the message that we get usually when we are reading like an introductory like cloud computing, let's say popular science article, right? That's the sense that you get. But in fact, it is much more than that. It is basically a physical infrastructure. We should not really forget about that. And like any other physical structure, be it a very modern physical infrastructure or a very like an ancient one, this is like a Hittite, what's it called? Not the bridge, the Hittite dam project. So these are all coming with a specific motivation, specific ideology, and it is serving a specific purpose. Like that's materiality of that infrastructure is extremely important. As an archaeologist, you know this already, right? But we are kind of forgetting when it comes to this metaphors. Basically, this cloud, it's up in there, not necessarily. It's a physical object. It can be harmful. It's very useful, but it can be also harmful too, right? So this is the motivation that I have here, just to remind you, every time you send an email, when you share your data in cloud source or Dropbox, etc., you're connecting a physical material object. This materiality as an archaeologist is something that you should always keep in mind. That's my, again, personal take. And because this cloud metaphor, it is hiding the power embedded in infrastructure and their building processes. And there's a giant anthropological literature behind those infrastructures for early modern, and for the past too. So I think we should also start applying such kind of concepts in digital archaeology too. Just because we are doing something digital doesn't mean we forget the anthropology, the human side of things. Here's the archaeological case. This is the way I see it, basically. So one of the things that we are reading nowadays is open science. Just everything is open. Open your notebooks, open your classes, open your evaluations. Open hardware is nowadays a thing. but everything is sitting on this cloud, right? So then the question is like, what is that cloud and who owns it, how it is managed, etc. So the intentions of the scientists is very good, open science projects, perfect, but without understanding this materiality of the cloud, that is not going to be an open science to my understanding. So like open science should be for everybody. That's the idea of the openness, right? But somebody is building that infrastructure, like the roads. Imagine that you are building a road infrastructure and you can put checkpoints on this. And that checkpoint is translated as the gateway metaphor when it comes to the network of things. Then who owns that gateway and how it is open, how it is closed is an issue when it comes to the open science. And of course, like these are all sitting on the platforms. That is going to be a discussion for a couple of other slides later on. Jumping to the myths. So again, I'm not going to give the definition of the myth, and I'm just coding these things from this, let's say the authority, this English authority, this Oxford's English Dictionary, so that you can just grab the definitions immediately by yourselves. And one of the myths that we are seeing today is this inclusivity. Like, I mean, this is nowadays very common to say everything should be inclusive, just classes included, gender is included, religion is included, age is included, etc. And the digital world is kind of pushing us to think, okay, like the moment I do something digital, it is immediately inclusive. But is that the case that we are going to ask now? Again, if you look at the literature, we are immediately seeing the digital is basically creating divides between the societies. In the first, it is the people or the groups who really does not have access to this connectivity, like machines, basically, right? I mean, even though in this developed world, like everybody has their cell phones, etc., like 40% of the whole world population cannot access to the internet using broadband connection. And when it comes to clouds, such kind of apps and websites that we are building nowadays, they are data hogs. And most of the people in the world are really not able to access such kind of, let's say, gateways to the data itself. And when you're trying to do this open data, I'm not really sure if it is a good way to go. Like we should somehow imagine different ways. And the second divide lies in the lack of information and skills for using ICTs. There's the gender issue. We know like the women tend to undermine themselves, that they say, oh, I'm not sure if I am a good ICT user, but when you provide them with a test, they're doing equally, sometimes better than males, but this this gender tendency kind of pushing them down in these ICT technologies, right? So when you're building up your projects, you should also include such kind of concerns. Even, I think that was a statistic from the Netherlands. I mean, when you ask male and female, how is your ICT skills? Women tend to underrepresent themselves. So that's an issue. And that division in the actual society is carried on to the digital world as well, right? I mean, that's an inclusivity issue that you have to figure out when you're doing, let's say, digital science projects, for instance. And the third one is the lack of capacity of a person or a group to transform or transfer between digital and other capital types. I'm going to drop a couple of marks here eventually. So like, but it's just to make sure that we are on the same page, basically, right? So, but there's not much philosophy is going to happen there, or economical theory going to happen there. So the idea is, if you provide a digital infrastructure, if you just let them to look at your websites, your apps, or whatever information that you are building at the end of the day, are they going to be able to get that information and use it for themselves to do something else, right? And that's a transfer from one capital type to another. If you are familiar with these terms from Bourdieu, like how the habitus works and how these capitals are moving from one thing to another, it is also valid for the digital as well, right? So also, let's make sure that we know a little bit more about this, the third type of the digital divide, which is going to be interesting for us eventually. When it comes to archaeology, that digital divide is also creating some biases for us. As a statistician, if I may put this statistician mask a little bit, there's a big concern and people are not really kind of paying so much attention to it, including myself, right? We are hopefully starting like a kind of a new small project about Istanbul, like how people are perceiving their heritage, the urban heritage. And the first thing that I did was go to the Twitter, just start scraping a couple of tweets, connecting to Twitter wall with the API, and just do some sentiment analysis. It's just 10 lines of code. You just understand what people are tweeting about Istanbul's heritage, let's say, right? That API is designed by Twitter, and that API is not giving you all the tweets. There's some kind of a different filtering processes happening. And if you want to have access to more tweets, you have to pay, which is okay. I mean, this is problematic in and of itself. Like if I can pay, it's okay. But if another university colleague cannot pay, it's a problem, I believe, right? But at the same time, forget about this part. Like why somebody is holding the actual data that I am hoping to analyze. I understand this is their thing, like this is their understanding of how the data should be distributed. But at the same time, when I'm doing a citizen science project based on the social media, then I have to really take into account these kind of issues, like what is the representation that I am doing with my sampling, let's say. It's a statistical problem. It is not a political problem. That is a statistical problem that we kind of tend to forget, because technology gives you the illusion of you are having access to everywhere. That is not true. With the standard APIs that you are using, it is 1% of the tweets that you can access, and it is the one that Twitter is releasing to you. So there's already a huge bias that you have to really be considerate of. And the other example is a little bit more maybe close to us. I use Wikipedia all the time. There's no shame in that. I get information, I get some ideas, etc. But there's a wonderful study by Marwick and Smith. It's a very recent one. They analyzed the entries about the cultural heritage sites, the UNESCO cultural heritage sites, and they immediately highlighted the biases, that who's contributing to that information. So that is basically almost all the information is coming from the English-speaking countries. The English languages and obviously is the dominant language. There's no problem with that. But when it comes to the sites of where there's some kind of a social conflict, then it becomes a little bit interesting, because the information provided by the English-speaking countries are not really necessarily presenting what that specific archaeological site is all about, right? So there is this bias immediately you have to think about. But when we go to Wikipedia, we immediately think, okay, like this is a good data information, this is solid, this is very well written, etc. But there's already embedded biases which are hidden to us. Like that's part of the game. Sure, that's part of the game, but we have to kind of consider when it comes to those hidden biases. Again, with the clouds, with the platforms, etc., this is getting a little bit easier for us to miss. This is like a warning sign for other work that you want to do. Transformation. So I'm going to bring back this digital divide number 3, the lack of capacity to transform or transfer between digital and other capital types. So we are assuming with the digital world, we are able to transform from one capital type to another. So as an archaeologist, I produce cultural capital for people. I find something, I put it in the museum, people go to the museum and they say, oh, this is an interesting one. They start to think about it, they do whatever they want to do with it. That is the production of the cultural capital that I enabled, right? And as an archaeologist, I also sustain the social capital, where I just create an environment where people can talk about these things and they connect to other people about their observations, their findings. That is the social capital for you. Right? But as a digital archaeologist now, I'm also producing digital capital. I'm building apps, I'm building websites, right? I'm building atlases. I'm putting a lot of information there. And that is also in and of itself is a specific capital type. And the idea now, if everything is transient on paper, like if things are transferable from one thing to another, then the digital capital should be transferred to the other capital types too, which is not always the case. Again, that is the concern of the transformation issues. This is mainly about the, let's say, the ontological side of things, but we are going to also see how it is affecting the labor that we are producing or we are putting when we do archaeological work. To give a small, like a description, let's say, this is nothing, like this is not rocket science right now, what we are going to say. So if you are dealing with a high technical object, if you are dealing with very complex software or algorithms that you are using, you are not many, let's face it. Like there are not many people who can do whatever you are doing. If you are working with the AI, not everybody outside is working with the AI. The public is usually interested in the meanings and what is produced and what is the end result. This is the bottom half of that triangle, basically, right? But we are not only talking about the science per se. It is not about the artificial intelligence. It is not about the algorithms. It is about also the labor, the structures of operation, the corporate, how they are formed, how they are connected together, right? So that technology has also a social side we forget when it comes to digital archaeology as well. So that's also a reminder for us that it is not only the algorithms, it is not only these wonderful theoretical ideas, but who produces those technologies, right? How it is being shared in different groups of people is also a concern. And for the bottom half, that becomes immediately problematic when you go to the global south. I mean, if you're an archaeologist, if you are working in Africa, in Central Asia, in South America, in Latin America, in Mesoamerica, like in the Middle East, in most of the cases, we are dealing with this bottom half almost all the time. And such kind of problems in the technology is immediately translated into their everyday lives too. So if you want to be more inclusive, that's the myth, right? So if you want to break that myth, you also have to deal with the transformation that is imposed to you as an archaeologist. And this jargon of new technology is always having this promise of, we are going to fix it for you. Now, this new method is going to be better than the previous one, but it always comes as a promise. And those promises are always, almost always broken because we are not really dealing with the undercurrents, basically. On the surface level, it looks cool. AI is wonderful, yes, no problem. But there are some other the issues which are behind the scenes, basically. What happens to us? Like how the digital is affecting our work, right? There's a very nice, let's say, analogy that Fuchs is using, the value generation in the house and the value generation in platforms. In the house means I'm a housewife, just I am helping my family, right? I just cook food, I clean the house, I keep everything tidy. That value is never acknowledged, in fact. Right. So the husband comes, I provide him with the food, I take care of the kids, and the husband generates some income, and the money comes, but I'm also creating a value in the house, basically. Right? And with this new feminist movements that we start to acknowledge more and more, and especially in the developed countries, this division is not so much visible anymore, but we know all the story, right? I mean, the typical housewife stereotype is still there. Let's not forget, that housework is also producing value, not necessarily a financial value, but it is creating a value for the house so that it is transformed into other domains as well. We are doing the same thing nowadays with the digital technologies. Me as a digital archaeologist, I am producing value for the platforms that I am using in the cloud, etc. Right? That is that part here. So the value generation in the house is coerced by violence, possible, or affection. I want to do it anyways. But the value generation in this platform is coerced by the ideology, which is the dominant ideology nowadays. So that is an important distinction to make. They are completely two different things. But at the end of the day, as an archaeologist, I'm creating value for these platforms. Again, the open science example. So with all these good intentions that we have, those collaborative infrastructures funded by the public should be for the public. It is open to public, etc., which is perfectly fine, no problem. This is our job. I'm happy to do so. But while this is happening, let's not forget that we are generating some value. And well, what is that value? Like where that value goes, right? And this is here, right? For instance, when I talk to the people that I teach, or sometimes with my colleagues, that I always hear that word, oh, Google Earth is free, Google Earth is free. So that was also like a job application. One of the colleagues said, oh, like I'm using Google Earth, it is free. It is free in price, let's make the difference. It is free in price, yes, definitely. But as you use those platforms, be it Google Earth, Google Maps, any kind of cloud platform, it doesn't matter, you are generating value each time you do something with it. And that is invisible to me. Like, I don't know why it is not so much clear. Like, it is not, like, it should be written bold and things that you are creating value when you are using these platforms. These are free in price, no problem. We are not paying, but we are generating value. We are creating an identity for these things, right? So that is something that we have to keep in mind. So that is, please, like when you're working next time with this Dropbox or like Google Earth, Google Maps, when you are sending this, sharing the address or things, that you are immediately adding some data, which is immediately transformed into something else by these platforms. Speaking about the platforms, let's make a quick definition. It is the penetration of the infrastructures. We talked about the infrastructures before. The economic processes and frameworks of platforms in different sectors and spheres of life. It's the example, basically, the easy example to give is these earlier game consoles, like this Atari thing from 1980s or something. So the Atari, the company, is just built this platform which combined the user, the gamer, you, and the people who produce the games. So that's the physical platform that we are talking about. Today, we are talking about digital platforms where some companies, public or private, doesn't matter, just creating those digital platforms, connecting you, the user, you are not the visitor anymore, you are the user, with the other services and markets which is beneficial for you. No problem. This is the world we live in. I have no objections. Extremely scalable, very useful. You are good to go. But then again, when we start to get connected to the other providers of the services, we are in fact dealing with the multi-sided markets, right? So it is not only the people whom we are hoping to reach, the museum, the online museum visitor, we're also dealing with other markets that we are not really aware of. Like that is an important thing that to keep in mind, I believe, all the time. If I may just change the definition a little bit, the reorganization of scientific practices and imaginations around platforms such as like the heritage apps, right? So we are now sitting down and imagining something. When I do a proposal, I have to put this app, the app ID. I don't have to, but as a digital archaeologist, as somebody who's trying to reach the audience, one of the first things I hear, including myself, my inner voice, says I have to produce an app so that I can reach the audience. But that app has to go through either Apple or Google. So now there's this gateway that I have to cross through. Like, what are the user requirements? What are the user needs? What is happening as I cross that bridge? Basically, that is a concern, again, for me at least, right? Or you are using this Zooniverse. I mean, it is a very good platform. Please check it out. This is wonderful, which is sitting on this Microsoft Azure cloud system. This is very wonderful. This is great. Microsoft Azure is a good platform. It's flexible. It is scalable. You just connect it. You can do whatever you want to do. But because of this multi-sided effects, we are kind of blurring the boundaries in a very strange way, which we are going to see when we talk about the militarization. A quick snap, let's say, for like what are the platforms that we are using, obviously. Like if you are a remote sensing specialist or a GIS user, etc., these platforms are there for many years almost now. And now it is online, no problem, but at the end of the day, these are platforms. But then again, if you go to the educational side, these platforms are now like the Coursera, what is it called, the other one? This Future Learn. And Leiden University is already like getting connected to these things. And imagine this AI is also coming, how it is going to affect my education. So should I also outsource my own skills to these platforms so that I can imagine my education around these platforms? This is how the mind changes. Or should I be very flexible and free? That's the scientific critical thinking, right? I should be free whenever I want to do. But then how am I going to be able to transfer those freedom that I believe that is necessary for scientific thinking and education into these platforms? And AIs will try to, and will start, they're already doing it, right? So the AI is already grading the papers. So what is my role as an educator in this case? So should I get ready for the next generation? Should I resist to it? Should I try to comply with it? Now, these are important questions I think we should be already asking to ourselves. Another platform people tend to use, I refuse to use it for some reason, this Turnitin, right? This is the thing that it is checking if the students are plagiarizing, basically. If you read a couple of articles about that platform when it comes to education, you are going to see it is not necessarily picking who's plagiarizing and who is not plagiarizing. It is in fact picking who's a native speaker who can get away from the plagiarizing or who's not a native speaker. So even though we are immediately broadcasting this wonderful tool that we have to use, what is the end result, in fact? Like, what are we really picking in between? Are we really picking up the people who plagiarizes it, or the native speakers who can just reframe it in different ways so that they can cross through, right? This is another thing that we miss when we are doing our education, basically. A huge topic. We don't have so much time, so I have to brush it through, unfortunately. Is the push by those platforms into the heritage domain, right? This Google arts and culture. So imagine you're a museum, you are hoping to catch this big data wagon, and Google comes and tells you, don't worry about it, I'm going to set up your data collection, I'm going to come and collect the data for you, here are the servers are ready for you. I will say, yeah, sure, no problem. So now we have this Google arts and culture where almost all major museums are intrinsically connected to. But let's not forget this Google arts and culture was also a competitor for the Europeana, which is a publicly funded European Union project, which also aimed to do this. And suddenly we have this one public and one private competitor, and the private competitor immediately took over the public initiative. From the open science perspective, we are saying everything should be open, but at the same time, we are providing the archaeological material to these platforms where they are the gatekeepers, basically, for these platforms. What happens if the Google dies one day? I'm exaggerating for dramatic effects, of course, but we saw it in the Facebook, the WhatsApp or Instagram just went down for a week or so. Everybody, oh, that's crazy, right? So that's also the problem with the clouds that we did not really talk that much. When we say clouds, we are assuming with the clouds, everything will be deterritorialized, like everything will be scattered. On the contrary, if you look at the geopolitics of the cloud computing, everything is territorialized. Everything is clustered in specific locations, which is kind of a no-no when it comes to open societies. There are a couple of students here who does the Python code. This is not a Python code, by the way. This is a different kind of code, but it is almost the same. We are not going to talk about this JS big data rise of correlation causation problem, which we thought it was past, but apparently with this AI, we also have to deal with this issue again. I'm not saying these things are bad, right? So like, even though, as I said at the beginning, I am technically with anti-corporate, anti-militarist, whatever, it doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, I am using it, everybody is using it. I think we should use it, no problem. And people have been using it for millennia already, right? So this is one of the finest examples I really like. So this is like a Babylonian cuneiform. It reads, this is not my translation, obviously. So it is from 1970s. So let's one be the initial capital, let's one mana earn 12 shekels, etc., etc. If you read this, this is technically a pseudocode, basically. So you can technically transform this, understand this written document from how many years ago into a computer code and do the same thing. The algorithms, the platforms, this is a platform, right? I mean, this is the Plimpton 322 tablet, which is a lookup table for the trigonometric operations, way before Pythagorean theorem, right? This is already a platform people are using as a physical object, saying, here's the platform, use it. That's what we have been doing for millennia. There's no problem there. But at least here, the actors were visible. When it comes to digital technologies, the actors started to get a little bit invisible, which is, I believe, a concern. Here's a code. It is a sorting code. It doesn't matter what it does. It starts to process and it ends. So there is a flow. So when you're writing a computer code, when you're executing it, it's very fast, right? It is milliseconds. But at the end of the day, it is a flow. It is a flow that you have to follow. And each line of code is cutting that workflow. That temporal flow is cut basically by each of the execution that you are making. And each of those code lines, let's say, assumes something. In this case, for instance, if you are comparing one element with the other element, you are assuming in the previous case, in the previous timeline, there was an event happening, and now I am comparing those two values together, so I'm coming to a conclusion. Right? There's a time flow. I write something, I compare two entities, and I come to a result, basically. And that comparison requires an assumption. And that assumption is basically related to the previous steps that you were already dealing with. Who, again, decides that inheritance is still valid? It is a very simple code. It is basically a sort algorithm. Here, what you see, it is sorting a list of numbers. But the sorting can get really complicated when you go to the Google site, for instance. Like the Google sort algorithm always changes. And what that algorithm produces is constantly evolving, and somebody is building those codes. There are so many actors that we really do not have any contact, right? I mean, that is a huge concern when it comes to this big data thing, right? So we are going to deal with lots of like data sets. Maybe in 20 years of time, people will be even dealing with even more data structures and data numbers. And that actors who are building these codes should be accountable for any kind of information that they are producing. But because of the clouds, because of the platforms, we are losing that touch basically. I did my PhD a while back ago. Corona satellite imagery was something that I was working on. This is a military technology that I use. GPS is a military technology, right? I mean, that's what the real life is actually, like, no problem. Sure, militarization is there, and it is a part of the everyday life. Also, we can discuss this, but let's start with that assumption, no problem. But when you start flying the drone, if that drone is as of this type, from a distance, you will not be able to see if there's a machine gun attached to it or not. It is not necessarily, I'm not trying to spark this basic discussion, or should we use it, should we not use it? Definitely not that. Let's go a little bit more beyond it. Like, by each time we use such kind of things, should we really think a little bit, are we really legitimizing the use of these things in our everyday lives? Like, as it becomes more normal in your use, you're basically opening up other doors. So this is an easy discussion to make, no problem. But how about this implicit cooperation that we are doing in the cloud, right? So this is the Zooniverse. So the citizen science projects are using the same cloud platform as the JEDI program, which was given to Microsoft. And that cloud platform is pulling this the multi-market site. So you are the market as an archaeologist, you are part of it, and the military is also part of it. And suddenly, from this distance to the drones, it's an important question, but still, if you don't want to use it, you don't have to use a machine gun on your drone when you're taking this archaeological photo, no problem, I mean, obviously. But now, suddenly, when I start to use this Zooniverse to do my citizen science project, I'm implicitly contributing to the advancement of the cloud, right? So the user services says, we are going to use your interaction with us to improve our services. Yes, they're going to improve their services for the military domain too. So why am I now suddenly contributing to the advancement of the military just because this digital is easy for me? I mean, that's an important question, I believe, to ask. Let's go one step further, right? Forget about this implicit cooperation. How does the way that we do JS operations or other spatial operations are relevant? So what happens, we start to merge epistemologies, like how we do science, basically. I can easily take this YouTube video about military tools in ArcGIS and do the viewshed analysis and just send it to the students, and they can learn perfectly what a viewshed analysis is by using a video custom made for military applications. To me, that's a little bit strange, right? I mean, I thought I was an archaeologist. I was not a military person, right? But the algorithms is the same. So what does it mean to our science, basically, when we are using algorithms which are developed in tandem with other markets, let's say, like that's important. This is Paximadia, right? It is the dry breads. It was a very local thing back in the time, but the Byzantine soldiers started to carry this, which is it's a technology. So drying something is a technology, right? I love it, I eat it, but I am a consumer of the military technologies. I use GPS, I'm a consumer, but I really do not want to be part of the production of the military technologies as well. So to me, as I have to give the consent to do this, and when I click the yes button, yes, I'm consenting to do that, but something else is happening out there. That's the whole idea, basically, that we are discussing. I dumped a lot of things on you. I realize that, right? I mean, that's part of the discussion too. We can skip these things very quick. Like we can discuss about what to do, how we can proceed, etc., etc. I think this is the most important point, right? We do not assume the unique application of humanities for human analysis and informatics for the information technologies. We should find different ways to merge them together. That's finding the common rubric, if I may use that term. We find the common rubric so that we start to amalgamate a little bit more together. Then we have more leverage to talk about the people who build those algorithms, etc., etc. One of the tactics is to figure out how we can read behind the scenes. Can we do the archaeology of digital archaeology? It's an important thing to do, right? I mean, do the algorithm reading. So, I mean, we always say JS, oh, it's a closed box, it's a black box, etc. It's getting blacker. It's getting even far away. Even at least before we were able to read the user manual of the ArcGIS and see how the viewshed algorithm works. Now it's getting even more farther away from us. Like we should just have to pull it back, basically. Radio is an interesting technological tool. So it was instrumental for the imagination, creation, and maintenance of the nation states. That's a great article, by the way, and the references will be at the end. You can have a quick look at it. It is about how the radio changed the East Indies colonies of the Netherlands, basically. That's a very fascinating article from a socio-technical perspective. Now, today with the digital platforms, we are doing the same thing, not for the nation states, but for the neoliberal economies, basically, today. And before, we were a little bit passive, so we were exposed to it. Now we are also the producers of it. So that is something that we will need to keep in mind. We ran out of time. I stop here. Happy to have any questions, concerns, manifestos. That sounds like a revolutionary acts, if possible. Thank you.
Very much too, very insightful. I'm sure that there will be some questions.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
I am going to quickly switch to just our faces so I can see if there's any questions in the chat. If you are listening online, hold on, let me go back to top one. Okay. This one. I should.
OBS is doing it.
Oh, lovely.
Speaking of platforms.
Try to use the one and just open a little lid.
Oh, this?
Yeah, little slide. Oh, no, it's just crashing.
Oh. Oh my goodness. Okay.
Leave the video for now.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's just.
Is it recording maybe?
No, it's still recording. Okay. Let me just go to the chat here. Okay. Yes, so we will open it up to the Q&A now. Apologies for the technical difficulties here. So anybody who's joining us online, feel free to type in any questions in the chat, and I will speak them out loud, and Tuna will answer them. So far, I don't see any here. Bizarre, actually.
I have a question.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah,
please.
Yeah, so what are your thoughts on it's a bit of a tangent, but using an active voice for technologies? Because you also do it, they say like the AI is coming, the AI is doing stuff, the cloud is doing stuff. Because I always feel that it's a way where we turn these technologies into like their own persons, and then we don't really talk about the responsibility of the creators of that amorphous blob that is AI. Just thought what your thoughts are on that, if you thought about it yet.
If I understood you correctly, are you referring to the agencies of these things that we create?
Yeah. So giving an agency through language, which kind of skews the responsibility of the results of that technology from the creators to this thing that we created, this AI or whatever.
Trying to think of an archaeological example, but it might be relevant to the work you do, maybe with the, like, I don't understand why would you listen to the AI? Why it's necessary?
Yeah, so I guess the point is that I think we use active voice for so say we use AI as an example. So we know the AI has a bias and it did something terrible. And then everybody goes like, oh yeah, AI is bad. It's like, well, it's not the AI that's the problem, it's the people creating that specific algorithm. And so, yeah, just thoughts on that.
Yeah, I see. Okay. I mean, I did not mean to undermine what I do, right? I mean, I do digital work, I do statistics, Python coding, AI a little bit, machine learning, etc., whatever you want to say. Like, these things are great. I mean, there's no question there. But what I wanted to highlight, especially when we were talking about that, the code, the piece of code that we were looking at, there's an agency, as you said, like as you highlighted, basically somebody deciding on something. It is no means saying this is the fault of the AI. Obviously, these are not creating themselves. When they start to build their own, when the AI builds an AI, that's a different story, right? That's a different story. But at this stage in the 21st century, we are not there yet. So we have the sole responsibility as the person. That's the whole discussion is all about, right? It doesn't matter if it is a complex AI thing, right? It's as simple as, it's a very old discussion nowadays, this least cost path analysis. Like, how are you going to choose which algorithm is the best, which is not economically determinist? Like, I don't think we ever solved that issue. There are lots of different algorithms that one can use to figure out what is the least cost path, right? It is, as the researcher, as the user, it is your sole responsibility to pick whatever, but it's not the GIS's fault to store those algorithms, right? It's your responsibility, definitely. But I mean, there's no easy answer.
Yes, great answer. Apologies, I was sorting out some technical issues again. We have a question from Wouter, who's joining us online, who says, what are your thoughts on the fact that many archaeologists are not really interested in the methodology, but only in the results? For instance, when applying automated detection, people are interested in the new potential barrows found, but not in the CNN behind it.
Perfectly valid. So, as like, if you remember that triangle, so on the top part, that is this high technical people who are producers of that knowledge, and at the bottom of the triangle, this is, let's say, the public, if I may use that word, who are the receivers of that information. That can be an archaeologist too, who's not AI savvy, let's say. So these people who will be benefiting from this high tech produced at the high level. My argument is not necessarily that is a bad process. I was just trying to highlight, as we go from this upper technology to the lower technology, that we tend to forget what happens in the production of that technology. So that technology is not only the CNN, these convolutional neural networks that you are trying to produce, right? So what else might be missing, or what else, or how else you are creating another form of bias, which is implicitly affecting those people. So the end user doesn't care about the result other than if it is accurate or not. So they want the end result. If there is a barrow here or not, it's perfectly fine. But as a researcher, it's my responsibility to make sure that as I'm building those CNNs or other AI technologies, etc., that I am not introducing any other bias, easier said than done, to create another form of amorphous, let's say, blob at the end, which produces a good result, but might just spoil something else. It's not an easy answer again. So like, these are very tough questions, I have to say. But the focus that I'm again trying to make, long story short, I'm not so much interested in how the technology is used per se. It is when we are building those technologies, how we forget other actors, other attachments related to that technology. It was a political answer, I think, because I don't know the answer, I have to say.
All right. Yeah. So I don't see any other questions in the chat. Please, if you're joining us online, feel free to type something in and we will answer it. Are there any questions from the audience here? Yes, Maxence.
I have a question regarding the debate around the implication of, for example, digital archaeologists towards military. Yeah, the questions you had about this, and to me, I was wondering if you believe that there is something very specific with digital tools, or is it more? Because to me, I feel like it's more of a general issue with any science in general, because there's always the question about funding, for example. Because as archaeologists or as scientists, we're going to depend on funding and money in a way. So there's always the implication that our freedom is kind of of course, there's a limit, but there's always a limit to our freedom as well, because we're always going to depend on funding, for instance. So I feel like it's it's not necessarily an issue that's only for digital technology, but I feel like it's more general, because like, as archaeologists, we're embedded in society and all the issues that are implied with that. So I feel like,
That is true. So basically the question is, or if the comment, if I understood you correctly, the comment is, this is a very generic issue anyway. So like any kind of discipline, let's say digital geography, also facing the same problems when it comes to the connection between the military and how we do archaeological, or like any kind of science or humanities, it doesn't matter. That's perfectly valid. My concern, or what I was trying to raise here, is not that necessarily. It's a very old argument, let's say, like what do you call the scalpel? Like if you use it to kill a person as a weapon, it's bad, but if a doctor uses it, it is good. I'm not there. I'm not really talking about the materiality of that connection. I am more interested in, right now, I am building that scalpel. Like now, I am suddenly in a position as an archaeologist, with my user interaction, with the data that I produce, with the algorithms that I test. Before, I was really detached from that reality. Yes, I was relying on the funding. I rely on the GPS. I rely on the Teflon, right? I mean, it's the space technology, it's the military technology you want to say. I cook at home, there's no problem, but I'm not the producer of the Teflon. But now, with the cloud, let's say, that relationship started to kind of merge together. Now I'm suddenly finding myself as the producers, or at least the contributors, or at least the testers of those technologies, which kind of irks me a little bit. That's the only thing. Otherwise, you're right. Yeah, no problem there. It's the old thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of these things that we've been talking about in relation to digital archaeology, things like militarization, uneven control data, these sorts of stuff, power issues. You could actually use a very similar story if you transport us 100 years back. Like back then, archaeology was also heavily involved in military technologies. The data was very much controlled by some of the same places in the world where they are controlled today. So you could actually argue that the digital things we're talking about, transformation of much older set of structures that was already in place for what digitalization really kicked in. So, and archaeology has been implicit in these types of power imbalances processes from the very start. So there's no clean archaeology. There never was. If you agree.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I mean, these problems that we are discussing today, you can exactly just move to 100 years, etc., so that we approach it from a different problem. But I fully agree. There's no problem there. The issue as a digital archaeologist that we are seeing today, this new digital, that's a discussion in our group too. Like it comes with a promise, oh, we are going to solve this problem. So I am promising you that it's going to be inclusive. Before, I don't remember that promise before. It was a little bit more to your face. I'm doing it. I don't care what you think, archaeologists, or I'm going to use it. But there was
that was the promise of world archaeology back in the 70s, right? we were going to open it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. That promise that maybe I have to emphasize on the digital parts, that the promise is brought by the digital is a little bit concerning to me. So I don't want to give a promise which I cannot keep, basically. And with the overall concerns that we are having today, with the metaphors that we are creating or using the myths that we are creating, etc., I am feeling that I am falling behind of that promise, because when I talk to my colleagues, oh, can you do this for me? I want to promise it to you, but it's not going to be a citizen science, in fact. Because if you look at the definition of that inclusivity, when it comes to citizen science, it has to include everyone. If I ignore these parts, I can do the citizen science, no problem, sure. But when I just step back and see what are the things that I will not be able to provide you with, then it becomes a concern. That's the only thing that I'm trying to highlight. Basically, if archaeology is not I don't want to use the corrupt. If archaeology is already a problematic area, digital archaeology is even more problematic than archaeology itself, because we are using more tools now, right? I mean, it's not only the trowels and the picks, etc. Now we suddenly start to bring the GPSs and other technologies that was becoming more popular these days. That's the only thing. No.
I don't see any more questions in the chat here. Yeah, I find the idea of inclusivity very interesting, because inevitably digital technologies leave people behind. But all of these efforts to make everything open, I guess your presentation wasn't meant to take a stand, but well, let's see. What I'm trying to say is, yeah, all the kind of open source, open data projects that archaeologists participate in, is it, I mean, it's not wrong to know, but yeah, how do we kind of be more explicit about all of everything that's going on in the background, the infrastructure, how do we bring that into our work?
That's the whole aim. I mean, that's what I was trying to say, as you said here. So, I mean, there's nothing, it's a beautiful idea. Just open science concept is wonderful. It's open hardware, especially nowadays, the open software, like everybody has access to such kind of things. It's wonderful. But I think it's our obligation as scientists, archaeologists, whatever you want to call yourself, to step back and see where that open science sits. I'm just trying to highlight that that open science paradigm is sitting within the cloud sphere, basically, and that is problematic in and of itself. That's the only thing that I want to highlight, basically, which brings other problems, this inclusivity and the other metaphors and the other myths, etc., etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what you just said begs the question: can you think of even on a theoretical level of an open science approach that is not dependent on this kind of infrastructure?
I would go back to the definition of the actual definition of the cloud. So when the cloud was envisioned like the internet itself, the internet was envisioned in such a way that it's going to connect everybody together, etc. So it started like that, but suddenly we started to see those gateways and different people who have like more access, less access, and things like this. I think the idea is still there, no problem. It's just a matter of finding it, even at a theoretical level, to do it in what other way is possible. That's the conversation, right? So what other ways is possible to do it in a better way is my only concern here. An immediate answer would be, I know it is not favorable for economic reasons or other reasons. Why not Leiden University is having their own cloud servers? It is still wasteful, still not green, still going to exploit lots of minerals in Africa that we are going to build those servers, etc. But at least it is going to be really decentralized in this case. But what we are seeing is the competition between those platforms. Google is coming to the universities and saying, use my email server, and we are using Microsoft Outlook. It's easier because we don't have to hire another IT specialist, right? It's all managed outside there. But when we do that, like, what are we losing? We are kind of, I have to say, we are losing independence of what we do, basically. Because now the gateway is kept somewhere else. The key, we don't have it anymore. Otherwise, yes, there are other ways it's possible that will become a political discussion probably, which requires some beer.
Yeah, well, I mean, on that note.
That's what I was trying to prove.
Yeah, right. This guy's late. Yeah, so I think no more questions in the chat. Any more questions from the audience? No? All right, well, in that case, I apologize again for those joining online that the video broke, but we will make sure to fix those issues for the next talk, which will be in a month on November 11th at 1600 CET. Yeah, so I'd like to thank you,
Thank you.
of course, for the talk.